to the astrology forecast for April of 2023. I'm Rick Levine. Before we jump into the material, I do have a few announcements. I'm going to keep this very short. The links to each of these events are below in the first of the comments below. So you have live links to follow up on any of these events you might be interested in. First of all, I'd like to remind you all that on Friday evening, April 7th at 6:30 p.m., and that's Pacific Coast time, as all the times are in this broadcast, I will be doing Astrology Night. I will be leading Astrology Night live at Soul Food Coffee House in Redmond, Washington. This will be live streamed and you can watch it on YouTube. It'll be available after the fact for those of you who can't make it live if you'd like to. And it will be a live discussion of what's going on for the month of April, but from a slightly different perspective than the one that I'll be talking about today. By the way, it is also my 74th birthday party, so if you're in the neighborhood, we're going to have a little bit of fun that night. Please feel free to stop by. All right, the first major event that's coming up is going to be Astro Tulum, and this is April 22nd through the 28th. In Tulum, Mexico, on the Yucatan Peninsula. There'll be 7 days of master classes taught mostly by me, but there'll be some classes being taught by Philip Daniel Miles, a British astrologer, and Aisha Cosmos, who's a Mayan astrologer, who will also be leading us on a one day. We'll take a tour down to the pyramids and to the ruins of the astrological temples there. And for more information on that and or to register, you can go directly to the link in the comments that has all the information that you need. This is going to be a small conference. It'll be limited to about 20-25 people. So it'll be rather intimate. And if you can make it, I look forward to seeing you there. This will, by the way, be held at the Amansala Resort, which is an amazing place. You can stay either at the resort itself. They have rooms from $90 a night all the way up to over $1,000 a night. It's a very well-known, luxurious, eco-chic place, and that's where we will be centered for the week. Next, coming up at the end of June, I will be part of a small conference or a short conference that's Astrology, Consciousness, and the Great Shift. And this will be a special weekend conference at the very well-known, famous Omega Institute just north of New York City in Rhinebeck, New York. I'll be co-teaching that with Maurice Fernandez, Lynn Bell, Rachel Lang, and Ann Orderly. Quite a stellar group of Star Watchers, and I'm looking forward to that. That's June 30th through July 2nd. Technically, that is the holiday weekend for Independence Day in the United States, but it is June 30th through July 2nd. Incidentally, I'll also be doing another weekend workshop at the Omega Institute called Liberating Venus, Love and Abundance, Awakening the Power to Receive with Astrology. And I'll be co-teaching that with Rachel Lang. And this is all about attracting more meaningful relationships and abundance and pleasure in your life as we explore concepts of Venus and how to embody Venus. And that will be the weekend of October 13, 14, and 15. And then the last event that I want to mention here is the Goa retreat, which is actually filling up quite early. There still is room. There's still plenty of room, but being so far in advance, it is filling up more quickly than I might have expected. This is going to be December 6th through the 16th in the southern part of Goa, India. And this is going to be an amazing retreat, an initiation into astrology at a beautiful Ayurvedic healing spa just up from the beach. It's a magical swimmable beach. It's a very easy and accessible part of India. And for more information on that, you can go to heavenandearthworkshops.com or directly to the page by clicking on the link in the comments comment section, and that's going to be just an amazing thing. I've taught there before. It's a magical and beautiful place. And that's it. Oh, and before I leave this section, I also just want to remind you that NORWAC is Memorial Day weekend. That's the Northwest Astrology Conference here in Seattle. And although I'm not on the program lecturing, I've been to, I think this is my 32nd NORWAC, I think, and have taught at most of them. But this is a year off for me, but I will be there, and I'll be hosting a little gathering, a party on Saturday night at NORWAC for my patrons and for those of you who are YouTube followers, and I'll have more information for that for you at NORWAC, and I hope to see many of you there. All right, let's get into the material for today. April is an intriguing month, an interesting month, a powerful month, but from a standpoint of astrological change, it doesn't hold as much newness as March did. Now, the thing about March is that although there was a huge amount of shifts from the number of planets, of slow-moving planets that change signs, certainly Pluto's dip into Aquarius, where it is all of April, and in fact, Pluto will stay in Aquarius all of April, May, and will dip back into Capricorn in June. We'll have more to say that on in a little bit, but Pluto's shift into Aquarius is significant, although it's important to understand that this is part of a longer-term shift. It's not like this is the potent thing of the moment. Although many astrologers are representing it that way, there's a gradual progression from Pluto in Capricorn to Pluto into Aquarius that will take us really into 2024, and we'll talk more about the dates on that in a little bit. The other shift, which might be a bit more noticeable, is the shift of Saturn into Pisces, where it has now settled, and it'll be here for a couple of years. And in Pisces, Saturn is moving direct all month. Actually, all the planets are moving direct this month, with the exception of Mercury, which does turn retrograde on the 24th. But Saturn into Pisces is, I think, opening up a bit of, how do I want to say this? It's a feeling like no matter how sure we were of who we were and what we were doing and where we were going, I think as Saturn moves through Pisces, if we're paying attention, we're more open to being aware that we don't really know everything that we thought we knew. And this is really important because it is the vulnerability of Saturn in Pisces that I think gives us the basis from which to make the changes that need to be made for us individually and even socially and culturally over the years ahead. So Saturn moving into Pisces has been a big one, and it is here, and it's here to stay for a while. The other one that's really important that happened just at the very end of that happened at the very end of March is the fact that Mars moved into Cancer on March 25th. And we're really just getting a feel for this. But I think this is more important for April than the outer planets, Saturn and Pluto, that we already talked about, because Mars moves quicker. Now, granted, Mars has been in Gemini for over 7 months, since the end of August of 2022. And because of its retrograde, it's been hanging out in Gemini. And now April has Mars in Cancer all month. And in fact, Mars moves into Leo on May 20th. And until then, I think we're feeling this need to protect ourselves. And again, I think this plays well with Saturn's move into Pisces, because Pisces is a water sign, as is Cancer. And at the very end of March, but we're still feeling this on April 1st, that Mars, having just moved into Cancer, is still forming a trine with Saturn, which is in Pisces, but moving a bit slower. So that on April 1st, and let's shift and look at the actual chart now for April 1st, we can see that Mars has moved already to 3 degrees of Cancer, and Mars actually moves through half the sign by the end of the month. By the end of the month, Mars is already at 18 degrees of Cancer, so we do get some movement out of Mars. It does pick up speed rather quickly. But Mars at 3 degrees of Cancer is still making a trine with Saturn at almost 3 degrees of Pisces, at 2 degrees 48 minutes of Pisces. And so what we have here is a smooth aspect between two traditional malefics. Saturn and Mars are both traditionally malefics, which doesn't really mean they're bad. It means that they're harder to manage sometimes. And the big question in astrology is when two bad or malefic planets get together through a trine, does that make them badder? Does it make them more malefic because they're in cahoots and they're working with each other? Or can we manage the energy a little bit more? I think sometimes it remains to be seen until after the fact. But my sense here is that we have the ability at the beginning of April to put things into motion in a healthy way and in a way that actually has longevity. And so Mars moving into Cancer, I think, gets off on a really good footing, on a sound footing. And at the beginning of the month, we also have the moon making squares to both Venus and Uranus, who are just coming out of a conjunction. And so the end of March, beginning of April, I think has some real excitement tied to it that sets us up for April. And I think April won't disappoint us. I think April supports a lot of change. There is a lot of nuance that comes into the picture, and I think some real surprises along the way, especially because we have the first of 2 eclipses, and we'll also dig into that in a few moments also. So moving through the month, and what we want to do is we want to highlight some of the most important changes. As I said, we begin the month coming off of the exact Mars trine Saturn, which I think really gives us the ability to put into motion things that we want to have endure, do we want to have persist. There is longevity tied to the actions that we put into motion at the end of March and beginning of April. But we also have Venus coming out of this conjunction with Uranus, and I think that this helps us settle things down a little bit. I think also that as we move through the month, we're coming off of a really strong Aries statement. Remember, right after the spring equinox in the Northern Hemisphere, when the sun moved into Aries, we had this new moon right away at the first degree of Aries. And yet this month we have another new moon, a second new moon in Aries. It's kind of like a blue moon, like an astrological blue moon, because a blue moon is like 2 full moons in a given month. Well, this is 2 new moons in the same sign. So it's different, but I think what's important here is that we're going to get another boost of energy with this second new moon in Aries. And this second new moon in Aries actually occurs on the 19th, and this is a solar eclipse, and we'll have more to say about that in a moment also. So I think that we are coming into a month where there are a number of changes and surprises. But in many ways, what I really think is going to happen in April is we're going to get a deeper sense of what Mars in Cancer feels like and what Saturn in Pisces is going to bring us. And maybe most importantly, what Pluto in Aquarius is going to offer us over the coming years. Now, I said I would come back to that Pluto, and I do want to come back to it right now before we actually move through the month on a day by day, because Pluto doesn't move very far throughout the entire month. In fact, even at the very end of the month, Pluto is still in the first degree of Aquarius. It barely gets out of that degree before it retrogrades back into Capricorn. And the point here that I want to make is that although a lot of us astrologers have really been waving the flags about Pluto moving into the sign of Aquarius, and it is important, we're really on a transitionary path rather than just stepping into new territory, because Pluto moved into Aquarius back on March 23rd. And Pluto turns retrograde at the very end of the month, actually on May 1st. It actually makes its retrograde turn and then backs into Capricorn on June 11th, which means that Pluto will have only been in Aquarius for about 3 months, for March to April to May to June. So it's just about 3 months, a little bit less than that. Pluto then is in Capricorn for 6 months, from June all the way through January of 2024. So we have the whole rest of 2023 with Pluto back in Capricorn, finishing up its business of destruction and deconstruction and ending the stability of those things that we thought were immutable, especially when it comes to public systems like government and banking and roads and things of that sort, things that have to do with the stability of society. And so we're not quite done there. We're not out of the woods, and that's important to understand. Then on January 20th of 2024, Pluto moves back into Aquarius, where it stays all the way through September 1st. So now we have an 8-month run of Pluto in Aquarius, which gives us more of a sense what this is going to be all about. But then on September 1st of 2024, Pluto retrogrades back into Aquarius, but it just tips back into the very, very last degree. I'm sorry, Pluto retrogrades back into Capricorn, but it just tips into the very, very last degree of Capricorn, and it only stays there for a couple of months before, on November 19th, again, this is 2024, Pluto moves back into Aquarius, and there it stays for 20 years, for about 19 more years. And so the point here is to understand that right now, with Pluto having dipped its toes into Aquarius here in April and May, and into the beginning of June of this year, 2023, we're not in that phase. We're getting inklings, we're getting foreshadowing, we're getting a sense of what it is that will be coming around the corner. And it's really important to keep that perspective, or else our hopes will be shattered, or we'll expect something and something else will happen and we'll be disillusioned or disappointed. But the point is here that we need to make the most of this transition rather than thinking it's just a done deal. All right, so coming back to April 1st, we can see here that the moon, like I said earlier, is in Leo. The moon actually stays in Leo until the 2nd. It moves into Virgo at about 4 a.m. And again, for the record, we're looking at an Aries rising chart. All times will be given Pacific Daylight Time. And in fact, sometimes the degree or minutes might vary from what I say because I'm looking at a chart that's either just afternoon or before noon. Sometimes, in fact, I'll be talking about an event that doesn't happen until 3 or 4 in the afternoon, so it'll look like on the chart we're looking at it hasn't happened yet. But the easiest way to make sense of all of this is to use an Aries rising chart and for noon every day, with the exception of the new and full moons, where I'll actually look at the specific chart itself. So, moving right along, I think that the first significant thing that happens in April itself is on April 3rd. We have the moon now in Virgo. And in fact, that moon in Virgo is harmonizing with Uranus and Venus today. But we have Mercury making a change of signs, Mercury moving out of Aries. And we've been in this incredible Aries run where we had the new moon, the vernal equinox, and the new moon in Aries with Chiron and Jupiter and Mercury in Aries. And now Mercury is moving into Taurus, and we're getting an inkling of what that Taurus energy will be like. But remember that Mercury does move all the way up to about 15 degrees of Taurus before it turns retrograde. And so that's an important thing to keep in mind. And that retrograde, as I said earlier, occurs on April 21st. And that is, I think, an important, that April 19th, 20th, 21st is an important period of time because we have a new moon eclipse and the sun changes signs, and also then Mercury turns retrograde. But as Mercury moves from Aries into Taurus, it does something that we're going to see repeated here in different ways, and that is that whenever a planet changes signs these days, it's going to make aspects with other slow-moving planets that have changed signs. That is Pluto and Saturn, and for a while at least, Mars too. But the fact is that as Mercury moves into Taurus on April 3rd, it's going to immediately pick up on a square to Pluto that is exact almost right away, because Pluto is at 0 degrees of Aquarius. And so when Mercury moves into Taurus, we're going to get that abrupt feeling like we need to entrench ourselves in what we know. That's Mercury in Taurus. We're not moving fast, we're holding on, but we're holding on to something that is presenting itself in new ways that we might not be quite ready for. And that's that Mercury square to Pluto, which in fact can bring up issues that were hidden and or were deep. It can be power struggles. I don't think that this is going to be an easy period of time, because I think things are going to come out in the open, as they continue to all the time, of course. But I think this is an important consideration. The thing, though, is that, remember, as planets move through the beginning of any sign, they're going to aspect not just Pluto, but Pluto and Saturn, because although Saturn is moving faster than Pluto, it's still close to the beginning of Pisces, which means that Mercury will square Pluto on April 3rd, but by April 5th, Mercury will form a sextile with Saturn, which in some ways will ground whatever it is that came out. It will stabilize the energy. And, and we're still working off of that Mars trining Saturn, which was exact the end of March. And even though it's beginning to wane, I think it's quite helpful, because that Mercury is going to translate that energy from Saturn, where it sextiles Saturn on April 5th. And then it's going to sextile to Mars. And that Mercury is going to sextile Mars on the 7th, because Mars is actually moving along too. But I think that this is actually days of relative smoothness, although I think some things can come out that give us the ability to heal something in the past. And this is all around the full moon on April 5th also. April 5th is important for another reason, and that is that the sun makes a conjunction with Chiron, along with the fact that there is a full moon in Libra. The full moon in Libra opposes the sun and Chiron. This is an important concept because we have the ability here to heal. We may run into situations where things from the past are coming back to us, and they're revealing the either the mistakes that we've made or the wounds that we've taken or the hurt that we are feeling presently because of errors that we either made in judgment or positions that we placed ourselves in physically, whether we were responsible in the moment or not, is not the issue. But the fact is that at 9:34 p.m., the full moon is at 16 degrees of Libra and 7 minutes. And this is really important because this full moon represents a fruition. It represents the need for relationship in working through our own individual hurts and wounds. We can't do it by ourselves. Even though the sun is conjoined with Chiron, we all have something to learn. And although we must learn it internally and in a way by ourselves, it happens best when it's through some sort of interaction with others in relationship, and that's that full moon in Libra where it comes through. By the way, just as an aside, this full moon is actually on my birthday, or very close. It is late in the day on April 5th at 10:18 p.m., and my birthday is on April 6th, so I will certainly be experiencing this in one way or another. All right, as we move on, the next aspect that we want to talk about is that Venus makes a sextile with Neptune, and that is on April 7th, the same day that Mercury is making a sextile to Mars. We talked about the Mercury-Mars thing a little bit earlier. The important thing here is that it's interesting because although it's a couple of days after the full moon, the moon has moved on into Scorpio, the moon will be opposing Mercury today at the same time that it will be making a trine to Mars and Mercury will be making a sextile to Mars. For those of you who have studied my work before, you'll know that Mars is at the point of Thales here, where Mars is releasing the energy. In fact, we also have a kind of a transiting kite where we have a grand trine in water with the moon in Scorpio, Saturn in Pisces, and Mars in Cancer, with the Mercury in opposition to the moon. And of course, there's the nodal axis right there. I think April 7th is going to be intriguing, and I think it's going to be, again, a really strong expression of energy where we can actually realize some of our fantasies, dreams, because we do have that Venus making its sextile with Neptune, along with Mercury sextile to Mars. We get to talk about things that are emotionally important to us in a way that actually manifests in the real world, because that Mercury in Taurus is not dealing with fantasy, even though the Venus sextile to Neptune is certainly attracted to the dream. On April 8th, we have a half square that I'm mentioning because it's between the Sun and Saturn. I think here we have to deal with the truth. We have to deal with reality. We have to, in some way, adjust to what we know the facts are now, even though they may not be the facts as we thought they were in the past. The Sun semi-square, half square to Saturn, I think is a little bit of a readjustment. Remember, the Sun right now is also traveling along at the midpoint between Chiron and Jupiter, and this is a cluster between Chiron, the Sun, and Jupiter that's been with us for several days and will stay with us all the way through the Sun's conjunction to Jupiter on the 11th, and then will even last a bit more. We have the opportunity to move into new territory here with a significant thrust without worrying about where it's going to take us. Even though we might be worried, we're still ready to push through it to get to where we need to get to. And I think that in some ways that's the exciting part about the beginning of April. We also have on April 10th, we have the moon having moved into Sagittarius, and Venus, which was at the very end of Taurus, being at home in Taurus for the first part of the month. Venus moves into Gemini, and that is actually later this evening at 9:47 p.m., which is why you still see it here at noon at 29 degrees of Taurus. But as Venus moves from Taurus into Gemini, we're going to get that same effect that I talked about earlier as planets change signs. And that is that Venus on April 11th will make a trine to Pluto as it moves into Gemini at 0 degrees of Gemini. It will be trining Pluto at 0 degrees of Aquarius. And then a few days later, on April 14th, which we will get to in just a moment, Venus will make that square to Saturn. Now, here we have, I think, the pleasant part, the enticing part of what we get out of how our values can intensify and deepen, even though that sounds contrary to Venus moving into Gemini. It's almost as we can entertain various possibilities and think about the potential of different things without actually incorporating it or assimilating it fully. That gives us the ability to go deeper than we would normally go. And as then Venus makes the square with Saturn, we may have that kind of, come to Jesus moment, or where we have to go, oh my God, this is really what it is that is a potential for being reality. And now how does that make me feel? And it may not make me feel as good as I thought it would have, as I was just entertaining it lightly. And that'll be the process from April 10, 11 through the 14th or so. So we also have on the 11th a couple of half squares cooking. We have Mercury making a half square with Neptune and Venus making a half square with Chiron. These are just introducing a bit of motivational factors into the day. It's like we can't get away with pushing our untruths or our fantasies as fantasies, or we can't get away with pushing our fantasies with Mercury semi-square to Neptune as the truth, because they're fantasies, and we may get called on them even if we try. And with Venus semi-square to Chiron, there's a sense of coming to grips with the discomfort that sometimes we need to confront when we are actually moving through difficult times or healings, or grief over old things, or reprocessing something from the past. And then that brings us to the Venus square to Saturn by the 14th, the moon having moved through Capricorn. And by the 14th, the moon is in Aquarius by midday. The moon moves into Aquarius on the 13th midday. And so by the 14th, the moon is in Aquarius. And in Aquarius, the moon will sweep through its conjunction to Pluto, and it will midday make its squares with Mercury and Uranus. But the important thing here is that Venus is making that exact square to Saturn. And I think that on the 14th, we may have some obstacles that we need to just contend with. Maybe it's just filing taxes, which is in the United States an April 15th due date. But what we're coming into is a new moon eclipse that's still a few days away. But along the way, we have Venus making a half square with Jupiter, and that half square is exact on April 18th, very early in the morning. And I think here we're aware of how too much of a good thing isn't a good thing. When Venus makes a half square to Jupiter, we become aware of how overindulgence, overabundance can have its own trappings. And so I think we just need to be aware of the fact that the Sun has conjoined Jupiter. That was back on the 11th, which is obviously a potential huge day. And I think I maybe glossed over the 11th a little quickly. because on the 11th, not only does the Sun conjunct Jupiter, but Venus makes that trine to Pluto. And I really think that we can gain some real awareness and learn something that's really important if we're willing to step beyond our normal boundaries, if we're willing to again entertain ideas that maybe we wouldn't have entertained in the past. But as we get to the 18th, the Venus is making that half square with both, with Venus, and Venus is making the half square with Jupiter, and which brings us to the 19th. And on the 19th, we have the moon having moved into Aries. The moon moves into Aries on the evening of the 17th. And by the 19th in the evening at 9:12 p.m., we have a solar eclipse. And this is a new moon eclipse in Aries. And as I said earlier, this is the second Aries new moon of the season, which is interesting because normally Aries energy doesn't like to see the same movie twice. It doesn't like to read the same book twice. It doesn't even like to do the same thing twice. Aries is about new. It's about the adventure or the excitement, the adrenaline of doing something that's never been done. And this second new moon in Aries is like a remedial event that Aries doesn't have the time or patience for. Now, the fact is that it's only a few hours after the new moon that the sun actually leaves Aries and moves into Taurus. In fact, the moon itself moves into Taurus at 9:29. The moon moves into Taurus at 9:29 p.m. and the actual eclipse or the new moon itself is at 9:12 p.m. So this is a very short-lived and in a way an unstable new moon, because it's like a flash and then it's gone. And I think here is the message of this eclipse, and that is that by the time we get to the late on the 19th or into the 20th and 21st and beyond, and then into May, it's like this sense of the newness of where all these outer planets have taken us. It's gone. This is our home now. This is our territory. We need to deal with it. We need to get used to it, and we need to move through it. But remember, as the moon is making its change from Aries into Taurus, followed by the sun's change, its ingress into Taurus, those two planets, the moon and the sun in that order, will both, as they move into Taurus, first square Pluto and then sextile Saturn. And again, we get that same energy that we had back at the beginning of the month when Mercury squared Pluto and sextiled Saturn back on April 3rd and April 5th. But now we're getting it for real. What does this mean? This means that now the power struggle, the sun square Pluto, which I think comes up in this flash of this eclipse energy, it's real. It's in our face. It's not going away. And on top of that, that's on the 20th when we have that sun square Pluto in the morning. And then by the following day, the 21st, Mercury has already slowed down. Mercury has barely moved a degree over the last several days. And on the 21st, actually, technically, at 1:34 a.m., but as we know, this is basically a stationary retrograde. It's a stationary Mercury. Pretty much from the 19th, 20th, 21st, that Mercury barely is moving at all. And that Mercury is barely moving while it's making a sextile to Mars, which is not exact until the 23rd of April, because Mars is now moving faster than Mercury, which is barely moving at all. And this is unusual. This is Mars actually being the active planet making a sextile to Mercury. Normally, it would be Mercury making that sextile to Mars, which in fact it did back on April 7th. And so we're holding this energy through this Mercury retrograde of the ability to say things that are real and stable and grounded in reality, Mercury and Taurus, in a way that connects with our feelings and our need to defend those feelings. That would be Mars in Cancer. The potential danger here, though, is slipping into the insecurity and the fearfulness of that Mars in Cancer needing to protect itself, even if what it's protecting is built upon a falsehood. In other words, even if our emotions are being stirred based upon things that are incorrect, we still may defend our feelings. And because Mercury is in Taurus, we can be incredibly stubborn in doing that. But I do think that this Mercury retrograde, Mercury maintains its retrograde all the way through May 14th. The entire retrograde occurs in Taurus. And so there is this sense of perhaps doubling down on those things which are untrue, the illusions that we are trying to hold on to. But I think here, as Mercury then turns direct in May and then moves on, I think that we are being forced to let go of those things which are no longer useful, no longer valid, or simply no longer true. So we have the sun moving into Taurus and making it square to Pluto, followed by its sextile to Saturn on the 25th. Now, Saturn's moved along, so there's a little bit more time at the beginning of the month. Both Pluto and Saturn were at an earlier degree. Saturn has moved from 2 to 3 to 4 degrees of Pisces. And so we have the sun making its sextile to Saturn now on the 25th, which again is, I think, quite stabilizing. This new moon eclipse, though, that occurs on the 19th, I think is significant because it's a point of no return. I think that what we're experiencing in April is the transition from the newness of the Aries into the, oh my God, it's Taurus time. This is the way it is. It's going to be like this for a while. In fact, I think the other thing that's quite significant is that Mercury, having been moving toward its conjunction with Uranus, doesn't ever make it. It's like the breakthrough that we want to have happen doesn't happen yet because Mercury turns retrograde just short of its connection with Uranus, and then it's not until the end of May when Mercury has turned direct where it then begins to move forward, and then into June when it actually catches up with Uranus and the breakthrough occurs. So I think this will be an important thing behind everything else that's going on. As we move onward, though, we do have the sun as it moves into Taurus. The sun does cross the nodal axis, and we're reminded of the fact that the nodal axis moves backwards. It's at 4 degrees of Taurus and Scorpio right now, heading back toward Aries and Libra, and that'll be important later on this late spring and summer because that nodal axis will actually back into an exact square with Pluto, and we'll talk about that in the months coming up. But I think already we're feeling the pressure of how close that is and how much we can't just jump ahead into the future. We have to deal with that Plutonic energy as it takes its time making that transition. So on the 25th, again, we have the sun making its sextile with Saturn. We also have Venus making a sextile with Chiron. I think this is an intriguingly smoother day than we've seen for a while, but we also have the moon moving through Cancer. Therefore, it's going to not only join up with Mars, but as Mars is moving towards its square with Chiron, that's not exact until the 28th. 27th, I think we actually get a little bit of early warning on that. And so we're feeling that square. And again, a Mars-Chiron square may be like, it may be feeling like it's just too much too fast. We may be feeling like we're not ready for all this change. And Mars in Cancer, sometimes under pressure, instead of defending how it feels or actually making a boundary well known and then kind of standing up for itself, sometimes Mars in Cancer will just simply pull in behind the hard outer shell of the crab and just go invisible. And I think the danger here of this moon going across the Mars and stimulating our expression of what it is that we're actually feeling, and maybe even our anger, as it squares Chiron, and then as Mars squares Chiron on the 27th, I think we have the potential danger of just going invisible, going quiet, and letting things happen without standing up for what we know is important. But I don't think it's going to last. Because, again, as Mars makes that square to Chiron on the 27th, that's exact in the early morning hours, by the 29th, although the moon has moved on into Leo, and by the 29th, it's actually by midday, it's in Virgo, that by mid-afternoon, Mars perfects a sextile to Uranus. And this sextile from Mars to Uranus can be the re-instigation, the re-stimulation of the actually do something about it. So we might see some action at the end of the month as we move toward May, but we have kind of that Mars square Chiron still holding on, even though the sextile to Uranus might say, you know what, it doesn't matter, I'm going to take a risk, I'm going to blast through this, and we're going to make that happen. Now, by the very end of the month, by the 30th, with the moon moving through Virgo, we're going to get some stability, not only with Mars kind of continuing its sextile to those planets in Taurus, which it has been for a few weeks now, but specifically its sextile to Uranus, we also get the moon making its trines to the Sun, Mercury, and Uranus. So I think we end the month on the potential of things being a bit smoother, even though once we get into May, things do change, and we're going to end that here for now. By the way, for those of you who are patrons at the solar level, that's the $3 a month, you'll be getting your mid-month update. For those of you who are not, this month we're back to our regular, a few times each year, I post the mid-month update to everybody, and this month it's only going out to patrons. So if you're interested in getting the mid-month update, please go to patreon.com and you can sign up. Again, this is a month-to-month thing. You can sign yourself up, and then you can, take yourself off the list anytime you choose. There's no long-term commitment here. And for everyone else, I'll see you the middle of the month. That's it. As always, think cosmically, act locally. I'm Rick Levine.